Introducing NASM One, NASM's ultimate membership program. Unlock access to everything your fitness career needs to succeed. Unlimited CEUs, free courses, access to our premium app, and exclusive discounts, all for $35 a month. NASM One is best-in-class tools, cutting-edge certifications, confidence in your craft, and everything you do as a personal trainer made easy, so we can achieve our greatest goals together as one.
Well, hello there, listeners. Welcome to this week's episode of the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall, and we've got a little bit of housekeeping at the top of the show today. The first, if you missed it in last week's episode, next week, we are going to start producing Better Than Fine as a live show on NASM's YouTube channel. I am crazy excited. This is part of the dream I had, the vision I had when I started Better Than Fine 4 years ago. It just feels like the next evolution of the show. And so I hope that you'll join me moving forward after this episode from now on, Wednesday afternoons at 4 p.m. on NASM's YouTube channel. You'll find links at all my socials. Join me there. And we're going to be doing a follow-up episode to the ultra processed foods episode. And we're doing it live. So I really hope that you'll join me. I'm pretty stoked about it. Our second bit of housekeeping. We would love to know what you think about all of the shows, including this show, all of the shows on NASM's podcasting network. So if you would be so kind, in the show notes for this episode, there is a link to a listener survey. And if you were to take it, you could win a $100 Amazon gift card. So take your chance and also help us to make this show and all of the shows on the NASM podcasting network even better. Okay, that's it for the housekeeping. Let's get to the show. So probably won't be much of a surprise to you to hear me say that I am a big believer that fitness, wellness, the tools of well-being, positive psychology, like all the good juju stuff that we know that people need, that it really should be accessible to everyone, regardless of gender expression, gender identity, socioeconomic status, color of our skin, and also our abilities physically, mentally, neurologically, regardless of any of those factors. The more that we learn about the ways that movement, nutrition, sleep, mindfulness, meditation, the foundations of well-being, the way that all of these things come together to build wellness and well-being, well, the more we learn about how much we need these things to survive and thrive, the more that it becomes so paramount to me that equity, that inclusion, and that access matter. And I first met today's guest at an event this past fall that was about that, essentially. It was an event held by Ainsley's Angels, and the savvy listener will recognize last year we had Rooster Rossiter, the founder of Ainsley's Angels, on the show to talk about his direct experience with resilience. So Brendan was the other speaker at this event last fall. And, you know, Ainsley's Angels, just a shout out to them as an institution. What they do is pair riders who, for whatever reason, are not able to run in races, foot races, so 5Ks, 10Ks, and the like, with people who push chairs so that they can be included in whatever kinds of events Ainsley's Angels is participating in. Brendan was at this event that I was at to talk about his work in making fitness more accessible and inclusive. And, you know, I think you're going to hear him talk about the nature of his work and how that might draw you in. It wasn't that for me. It wasn't his passion for his work. I think you're going to hear that come through as he talks about his work, how passionate he is. You're going to hear his voice and his story. For me, it was actually the way that when Brendan started talking about the modeling, the way he approaches his work in inclusion and accessibility, that really got to me. Because being in the fitness industry for 13 years, I have found that oftentimes the fitness industry's approach to working with someone whose body maybe works a little differently than what we've been taught to think, is that the practitioner is taught that they're going to mitigate what they, soft quotes here, think is wrong with that person and the way their body works. And not only do I think that that's kind of paternalistic, I also, as somebody who has a chronic illness that is occasionally disabling, it just has always rubbed me the wrong way. Like, let's work with what I've got and not this idea that there's something wrong with me. And so it was the way that Brendan approaches his work when he talked about how he approaches inclusion and accessibility that really got me. And I knew that I had to have him on the show. So Brendan Aylward is the owner of Unified Health and Performance. He is the executive director of AdaptX. I'm sure he's going to tell us all about all of that. He's also been a member of Team Hoyt New England since 2014. And in the 10 years that he has been racing with his duo partner, they have done almost 100 races. He's going to tell us all about that too. I'm really excited to have him on the show. Brendan, welcome to Better Than Fine.
Darlene, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really great to have you here. So tell us the story of discovering Team Hoyt. Invite the listener in and explain what Team Hoyt is, because I was stoked to meet you, and how that grew this passion that you have for inclusivity and access and fitness.
Yeah, absolutely. So my first introduction to disability was through Special Olympics in high school. So I broke my wrist and I was unable to play high school basketball. So my mom encouraged me to volunteer with a new program that was being launched in our community. And I can't quite put my finger on it, but I was immediately drawn to it. I think it was some combination of the athletes really just wanting my time. They didn't have expectations for me beyond being physically present and caring about their success and their relationship. And Special Olympics immediately became a huge part of my life. I ended up, for the majority of college, commuting to school so I could come home and coach every weekend. I was running the Special Olympic programs in our district after a couple of years of volunteering. And I was also introduced to a program called Best Buddies around a similar time. So that's a school-based program that pairs people with and without disabilities in friendships. And I was introduced to an individual named Jacob through that. And he started spending weekends with my family. He still spends weekends with my wife and I and my kids. And we started running together in 2014 as something to do on the weekends. At that time, I was maybe a junior in college. Didn't have any prior experience running, but I was looking for some sort of athletic pursuit. And we met Team Hoyt, a representative from Team Hoyt at this local charity 5K, asked if we were interested in getting involved. And of course, my answer was yes. Dick and Rick Hoyt were huge influences on my career in general. And I guess that's how I was first introduced to it. A couple months later, we went to the Team Hoyt annual 5K. And from there, it just kind of kept snowballing to the point where we run a lot together now.
You do run a lot. And I think, I've heard this story once before when we met, and the first thing that always jumped out to me was that your mom was like, okay, yeah, you broke your wrist, you can't be basketball, you got to do something. And so shout out to your mom.
Exactly. Mothers are always right.
Yeah, right. Aren't they? Now, not for nothing. When you told that story, I broke my ankle in high school and missed a season of basketball. And I was like, man, my mom should have made me go volunteer.
Exactly.
But that little seed gets planted. And one of the things I love about this story is that you had the awareness of your own interest to just seed it forward and seed it forward and seed it forward. And, I think that's something else I've noticed about the Ainsley's Angels community is that you've got college students who are volunteering their free time to show up as examples of people who show up for other people, right? Like that's what that whole community is really about. And that, Jacob still all these years later is staying with your wife on the weekends with you and your family and is such a part of your life in such a deep way. For our listeners, can you just explain what Team Hoyt is?
Yeah. So it's a organization where an individual with a disability who might be unable to participate in a race independently gets access to a running chair. And then there's a variety of us that are called angels or pushers. There's a variety of terminology. And some of our team is kind of paired up. For example, like I always race with Jacob. Jacob doesn't race with anyone else. But there's also members of our organization that don't have a designated runner with them. And so we have a calendar of events they'll RSVP, say like, I want to go to that race in Plymouth, Mass, or I want to come to our race in Lancaster. Do you have anyone to push? And we pair them up accordingly. So some of us have our own racing chair. Some of us borrow chairs from the Hoyt Foundation or Hoyt running chairs. And we get to participate in races all around. There's varying degrees. Some of us take it to marathons. Some of us just participate in local charity 5Ks. One's not more significant than the other. It's great to introduce these models of inclusion within local communities. So.
Yeah, it's kind of, I don't know if you've heard the phrase other significant other, like Jacob is your other significant other, but everyone else is kind of dating around.
Yep.
So this story, I mean, you gave us the quick version, and thank you for doing so, really seeded for you a passion for adaptive fitness and for inclusivity in fitness. Can you unpack what that is just as a concept, and then tell us a bit about your gym? Because I think your gym is super cool.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I think it's, I feel very fortunate that I found whatever you might want to label it, a purpose early on. And during those late teen, early year old like time frame when a lot of people are trying to figure out what to do, for better or for worse, I had my mindset on this thing. So I was studying special education in college. About halfway through university is when I decided that I want to do something slightly different. I want to combine my love of sports and athletics and my love of inclusion into a facility where people with and without disabilities could coexist. So the last 2 years of university, I was commuting about an hour back to my high school to coach or to run strength and conditioning for the basketball and the hockey programs. My intention was to kind of build up a client base. So when I did have my own facility, I would have some kids to pull from. Obviously, in addition to my Special Olympic athletes, because that was an essential part of the model. Like, although the main target was perhaps the individuals with disabilities, I knew that my vision of inclusion couldn't exist without all individuals. So, and I was refining my skill set as a strength conditioning coach for competitive basketball athletes, and I was refining my creativity and modifications for individuals with disabilities. I was personal training some people at various facilities during college as well. Got my NASM personal trainer cert and kind of went on my way with that. And then about a year after college is when I decided that no business plan was going to perfectly articulate my vision. And at some point I just had to dive in and start opening a facility and figuring out. And I've learned more in the last 8 years than I probably ever could have anticipated. And my vision 8 years ago is definitely different than my vision now. So that's why sometimes it's like paralysis by analysis. You can think about a business for years without taking any action. At some point, you just have to figure it out, dive in and figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's just great guidance for a lot of our listeners. We have a lot of trainers and coaches and positive psychology practitioners and people who are just trying to figure it out. It's like, rip the Band-Aid off and you got to jump. Mixing all my metaphors here, but let's talk about unified health and performance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us about that vision, because it's so unique. And, I wish I lived closer to you because I would be a member in a heartbeat.
Yeah. I don't know if, and I'm always hesitant to say that there's not another facility that operates like ours. I'm sure there is. And if there is, I would love to connect with them and learn from them. But
reach out, friends.
Yeah, exactly. I think, but the idea of running a for-profit facility where people with and without disabilities could seamlessly coexist, and the presence of a disability is just another factor to consider when you're programming, like whether you're training a basketball athlete or a soccer athlete or a hockey player. When the presence of a disability doesn't prevent you from accessing the facility was unique, I think. I was pulling from adjacent programs, adaptive fitness programs, maybe that train individuals with disabilities separately, which isn't a bad thing. It's just a different type of model than mine. And my model definitely evolved over the years. I think it was initially influenced by my Special Olympics involvement. So, and obviously unified health and performance, kind of pulling from like the unified sports model that Special Olympics started, just in the title in that regard. But we had high school athletes who would stay after their workouts and help we'll use the term adaptive athlete just because it's the most commonly recognized lexicon. So we had these high school athletes who would stay after their sessions and support our adaptive athletes in their training process. And over time, we tried to kind of get it to the point where it wasn't like middle school class, high school class, adaptive class. It was all of them intermingled.
Athletes making
Like
fitness.
just athletes. But like, I'm also careful to say that not everyone necessarily wants to be in a big group environment. So it's not inclusive just to stick people with disabilities in other classes if they, one, don't possess the prerequisite skills to be successful. And maybe not everyone wants to be in a group class, disability or not. Some people like personal training. Some people like quieter environments. Some people have sensory needs and they need a quieter environment. So I think the ultimate, I guess, like benchmark is that individuals have options to decide when they want to train, who they train with, and how they train. And that's kind of the model that we've tried to meet over the last 8 years.
Yeah. And the model meets people where they are, right? Which is what people
Exactly.
need.
Yeah. Yep.
You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. Our guest today is Brendan Aylward, and we're talking about accessibility and inclusivity in fitness. You threw a phrase out that I want to make sure our listeners are caught up with, which is adaptive fitness. Can you just explain what that is?
Yeah, I think it's just the most commonly recognized differentiating term for fitness for someone with a diagnosis or a disability. Everyone adapts to a workout or to fitness. So I'm not sure where exactly it originated from. And when we use adaptive athletes, sometimes people will reach out to us and say, well, I'm not training for a sport. Is that still for me? And like, it doesn't mean that you have to train for competition. It just means you have a disability. We're going to support you in a fitness setting. So yeah, adaptive fitness, it's just fitness that supports individuals, whether they have a hidden disability or a physical disability or a cognitive impairment or an intellectual disability. It's just a way of, I guess, maybe describing, ultimately all fitness should be adaptive fitness, but that's the most commonly recognized term. So
yeah. And I think to me, adaptive fitness is such an important concept because, having been in it for a hot minute, and I think I've been year 13 now, when I came onto the scene and functional movement was really starting to take off and everyone was talking about corrective exercise and corrective this and corrective that. And it was through this really, I'm going to throw the word corrective out there, corrective model of let's do your movement screens. Let's tell you everything that's wrong with you. And then I'm going to design this protocol to fix your alignment. And I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I've had a bunch of really crazy dislocations and tears and just stuff. And for me, the idea of adaptive feels really empowering because it's like, okay, we're going to make it accessible to me on whatever body I woke up in today, instead of feeling like I'm broken and you have to correct me before I'm allowed to do anything really real. And so I remember learning that phrase and feeling like, yeah, that feels a lot better for me. I don't know if you want to speak to any of those ideas, but when
yeah,
you
I would love to.
presenting your modeling, I was just like, oh, this guy gets it.
Yeah. Maybe kind of piggybacking off of the corrective specialist type of approach to fitness. I think we can look at the social model versus the medical model, which I know you're familiar with. So
share
the
that.
medical model, so the medical model claiming that an individual is disabled by a specific impairment, whether it's a physical or cognitive limitation, whereas the social model claims that you're not disabled by an impairment, but rather you're disabled by society's lack of accommodations for you, or society's insufficient response to your needs. So that social model, it's an incredibly important framework, I think, because it places the burden on the professional instead of the individual. It's not your responsibility to come with your best every day or make sure that your EDS isn't impairing you from participating. It's my responsibility to meet you where you're at on that given day, design a program that doesn't exacerbate symptoms and works in whatever ability you have. So that social model, that's why whenever I work with a gym or a personal trainer or a fitness professional, that's what we start with, introducing that concept, because I think all things kind of branch off of that concept, at least.
Yeah. And I remember you teaching that model when we were with the crew from Angel's Angels, and I could feel it in my chest how right that felt. And it was the first time I'd been exposed to those ideas. And I know that they're going to be new ideas for our listeners, which is, to me, this is one of the most important reasons I wanted you on the show, was to get this under the megaphone here, which is, let's rehash it up for them. The medical model, oh, you're disabled because I slapped a label on what you've got going on, whatever your stuff is. Whereas the social model is, if I'm in an environment that it meets me where I'm at, I'm not disabled because I'm included here. It's accessible to me. I'm able to function. And it's on the facility, it's on the professional, it's on the coach, it's on the team to meet me where I'm at, or anyone where they're at, regardless of what they got going on. Did I get it right?
Yeah. And I think it's important to just maybe clarify that,
Yeah.
that I'm not like, I don't see disability, or I don't mean to diminish the challenges that someone with a disability faces. And I'm not saying that we're like completely overlooking it. We're just saying that it's a consideration to make. It's something that we're willing to have the growth mindset to learn about. I don't have all the answers. That's one thing that's tough about being in a position where sometimes I speak to gyms and fitness professionals, assumption that like I'm an authority figure that has all the answers. I think that's what I love about being on other people's podcasts, hosting our own, is having these conversations with people, learning about their different perspectives. And every time we host an episode, I learn something new. And I think just my goal is to normalize the inclusion of people with disabilities in fitness environments. But the fitness professionals, the gym staff do have to take the responsibility of educating themselves, adopting these perspectives. And it has to be a cultural ethos thing. Like, you can't have one trainer at a gym that specializes in adaptive fitness and make it inclusive. Because then if someone rolls into the gym and that person's not there on that day, they're not able to train just because Darlene's not at the gym on that day. So I really want gyms to adopt it globally, kind of these perspectives, and making sure that their staff are well educated on these principles.
Yeah, the staff and also the facility itself, right? Like, can you talk a little bit about what facility accessibility looks like when it's done in a meaningful way? Because, I
Yeah.
worked for a major luxury gym in Lower Manhattan. They're like, "Ooh, we're accessible because we have an elevator," but the elevator was broken half the time. So
Yeah.
it really, a lot of times those people just couldn't get out of the lobby. My now husband and I were the two, like special populations trainers, and we'd lose sessions every time the elevator broke. It's like, oh, guess I'm not making my bonuses this month. So talk a little
Yeah.
bit about what it looks like when it's done well.
Yeah, I think you can't be accessible at all times for all individuals. There
Fair.
was a really good conversation that I had with someone from the Brad McCannell from the Rick Hansen Foundation up in Canada, and he's the accessibility specialist. And he just talked about when they were renovating an airport and how they added a strip of carpet down the middle to reduce some of the noise for people with hearing impairments. But at the same time, it made it harder for wheelchair users to propel because it's harder to push on carpet. So sometimes you'll make an adjustment for one person that might be at the detriment for another. So I think accessibility, it's never a destination. You never get to say like, I'm wholly accessible, like I'm always inclusive. Accessibility is kind of context dependent. It requires being reactive to the needs of individuals who come in. I don't get to decide if my facility is inclusive and accessible. You get to decide if it's inclusive or accessible. Inclusion is kind of an emotion experienced. So I don't just get to throw someone with autism in a group class with their non-disabled peers, and I don't just get to say, oh, I'm inclusive. That person gets to decide if that's where they feel included. So accessibility is kind of multidimensional. So is inclusion. It goes beyond the physical space. Like maybe that elevator did work all the time, but if they got up to the gym and the front desk person had no intention of helping them, or the front desk counter was too high, even if you meet the ADA standards, we like to use the term usability instead of accessibility. So, and that depends on efficiency. So how quickly you can get through your workout. It depends on effectiveness. So whether the results that you're after, you actually achieve. So those are kind of like the components of usability. So you might be able to get into a building, but if it takes you 30 minutes more to get to the gym, then that's not really efficient. And people have lives outside of the gym, and they deserve, to be able to not spend their entire day just getting in something like a workout. So,
Just trying to get it in.
yeah, so all that to say that you can be physically accessible, but you also have to be socially accessible, emotionally accessible, socioeconomically accessible. Yeah, so I think there's a few different pieces to unpack with that.
Yeah, and I want to unpack them. You're
We'll
listening to the
try.
Better Than Fine podcast. My guest is Brendan Aylward, and we're talking about accessibility and inclusivity in fitness. Well, let's look at them, because one of the things when we first met, and I was listening to you talk about this, I was like, yeah, but what's that cost? I think that you have done a good job of building a model where it does make it actually accessible from a financial perspective, which I think is one of the big criticisms of personal training in general and having a gym, and like, oh, it's so expensive. Talk a little bit about how you make the price point work, because I think that is going to stick out to some people. And I know that I've had some people mention to me about, adaptive fitness, and that they just can't clear the bar. So how does your facility approach that?
Yeah. And I mean, I won't pretend that I have some
Magic
super
wand.
complex, or even like my facility is not perfect in any way, but the culture that we've created has allowed us to come up with solutions for the specific problems that arise and the needs that our clients have. But I'm actually writing a free mini course right now on like the value proposition of inclusion and some of the misconceptions within accessibility. So like you mentioned, I think people think accessibility and they think $10,000 handicap doors, $3,000 sci-fit bike, and those are all pieces of it. But actually, in my space, we started with a very small collection of equipment, which in some ways, more open floor space makes it a lot more accessible. It's a lot easier to navigate the gym when you have a lot of open space. So that's one check in the positive box of just having less equipment. So I'm not a commercial gym. Ours looks a lot more like maybe some hybrid between like a CrossFit box and a sports performance facility. We have half turf, half rubber, mostly free weights. And yeah, I think we come up with creative solutions to using those equipment. We leg press with a prowler sled. We don't have a leg press machine. We do assisted squats for our athletes with mobility impairments. We transfer them from their wheelchair and they perform variations of squatting, modified squats. It really is like, I think a lot of times being a good adaptive fitness professional is just being a very well-versed traditional fitness professional, to the point where you have all these different ideas to pull from, that you can come up with solutions for whatever your client needs. Maybe one example, maybe your listeners are familiar with something called like a Hatfield squat, where you hold on to something in front of you while you squat.
Don't assume it. A lot of our listeners are positive psychology people who are just really interested in what we do.
Yeah. All right. So I'll quickly explain it. So Hatfield squat, something where you're holding on to something in front of you and you have a safety bar on your back. And a lot of our sports performance athletes use it because it's one way to squat really heavy. But some of our wheelchair users use it because it's one way to have some anterior support while you're squatting. You're holding onto something and helps you squat. But if you never knew what a Hatfield squat was, that might not really be something that you even envision or that you think of. So just having a breadth of knowledge to pull from, I think, is what makes you an effective adaptive fitness professional, or at least a creative one. So all of that to say, I really advocate for facilities not necessarily needing to completely retrofit their environments, but look at their facility. Can they reach your med balls? Can they reach dumbbells? Can they get their wheelchair up to a cable machine? Just kind of those small things that make a facility more accessible and usable, that don't require significant financial investments. Because like you said, that is, I think, one concern that people have.
Yeah, I think it's a thing that people just assume. But you said it a few times, and I just want to parrot it back, is like, obviously just knowledge of how bodies work and what's going on with your client, but creativity, right? Like I've always considered creative problem solving, whether we're talking about a fitness professional, movement professional, or coaches in general. Like this is a creative expression form where the expression is, how can I help this person, solve a movement puzzle that I'm giving them, or meet them where they are in a way that they can be successful. And so I just want to parrot that back, because I think it's one of the things that you're describing that you do really well. And so I also want to give a shout out to, you have some education that you have developed through AdaptX, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit, because I know a number of coaches and trainers that listen to the show, like they're going to need CEUs. And if somebody's interested in this, I want them to know that you have resources for them.
Yeah. Yep. And it's NASM approved. So we started our nonprofit. It arose from the gym. So essentially how the curriculum started was I was creating presentations for my trainers, for myself, because one of the best ways for me to learn was to act like I was going to teach it to someone. So I was making these modules, these presentations to share with our interns, with our coaches. And then it kind of just kept growing to the point where it became a significant enough curriculum. And then since it was kind of disjointed in its initial assembly, we made a few iterations, revisions, and we're able to make it flow a little more seamlessly. So yeah, fundamentals and theories of inclusive and adaptive fitness. Start with social model. We talk about universal design for learning. So some of that special ed background that I have, how to apply those concepts to your instruction. Talk about accessibility standards, communication strategies for people who might communicate differently than you and I. And then we go into various diagnoses, autism, CP, Down syndrome. We have a module on EDS, multiple sclerosis, spina bifida, a variety of different diagnostic modules as well. And yeah, how to modify exercises for people with mobility impairments.
How to meet people where they are.
Exactly.
Ooh. And I know I'm gonna lay this on you without asking you to prepare for this one, but can you talk a little bit about the research you're doing? Because I got really excited when I heard that you were doing this work, and I just want to like give a shout out that one of the things that I want people to hear is, we think social media has taught trainers that their careers have to look like a very certain thing, and you have really not just created value through the gym, through your training, but created value in a feedback loop back into fitness to help us all be better at an area of need that you've recognized. And I think that's, I think people say the word inspiring in the adaptive space all the time. And yes, I understand what they mean, but I think you personally are inspiring in the way that you recognized areas of need and then created solutions. So talk about the research, because I think people should know that that's even an option.
Yeah. And it's an option for someone who has no advanced degree like myself. So I think I love academia. And for me, opening a private facility didn't require any advanced degrees. So there was really no incentive for me putting off this vision that I had for a few more years to pursue a master's degree. But at the same time, I do miss some of that stuff. So I'm fortunate that our nonprofit does have a research director. We have a good relationship with the university, Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences, where Dr. Joyce is from. And him and I meet, we're always thinking like what is going to move the needle the most, or what's going to have the largest impact. So we have some intervention type studies. So we have a couple publications on cerebral palsy. We just submitted a big project, a big grant that hopefully will get approved for high intensity training for people with Down syndrome. So before Rick Hoyt passed away, he gave me his blessing to kind of name our space here after him. So it's called the Rick Hoyt Research Lab. And the mission is just to find strategies to improve the lifespan and health span of individuals with disabilities. So it's not just the intervention type studies, 12-week, twice a week training. Is it effective for people with cerebral palsy? But it's going beyond that. It's we hopefully will run projects that will look at the accessibility of fitness centers, how we can improve them. And then it influences the materials we create for the course. Every podcast episode influences the course in some way. I think I'm fortunate I always try to learn, I guess. And then I try to just incorporate that into what I share with other people. So it kind of expedites the learning process for them as well. So yeah, it's great to be involved in the research. At the same time, sometimes research takes a really long time. So for example, like this Down syndrome grant, we worked on for 4 or 5 months, and now we'll wait another 4 or 5 months to see if it gets approved. And in that 8-month period, I could have just ran the intervention with my clients with Down syndrome at the gym and figured out. So research is great to formalize. It's I love being a part of it because it kind of pushes me intellectually to kind of stay on top of things and learn new skills. But at the same time, sometimes it moves slow, and sometimes there's a disconnect between the literature and the practical experience, because sometimes it's hard to quantify some of the stuff that we do. But it's great to be involved, and my career is great because I get to go in a bunch of different paths. I'll coach for 5 hours and then be on podcasts and work on research and work on the course, and it's fun to just have so many different things to work on.
Yeah, it is kind of great to have a different day every day, right?
Exactly.
Me too. Well, if you ever want to do any well-being studies, I know a positive psychology practitioner in your Albany that's available.
Yes, I'd love to.
And I've learned listening to your show. So for the listener, talk about your show.
We've been hosting the podcast for probably about 8 months now, having conversations with people that are either building accessible businesses, advocating for inclusion, or excelling in adaptive sports are kind of the 3 personas we typically interview. So that's the episode we released yesterday, is with the captain of the wheelchair rugby team for the US. But then we've interviewed President Biden's director of disability policy, and it's been great to like learn from all these different people that have skill sets different than me. It fills in some of the gaps that my learning didn't include. And so we release 2 episodes a week, Monday and Thursday. It's called the AdaptX podcast. Now we've done it to the point where it might require some rebranding, and maybe it should be called something else. But that kind of more clearly communicates, I guess, what it is, instead of just branding it after our nonprofit. But that's probably a conversation for another time. But yeah, the AdaptX podcast on any of the streaming platforms, if people are interested in learning more about inclusion and accessibility within business and fitness.
Yeah. And also just like casual shout out to how awesome it is to be a podcast host, because then you get smart people on and you learn things from them, like I am right now.
It's a lot of fun.
And let's talk about something I know you're excited about. You and Jacob have a big event coming up. You want to talk tell us about Boston? A little thing called a marathon.
Yeah. Someone's telling me I got to run a few miles in a month, but I guess the goal of qualifying for the Boston Marathon was something we started about 4 years ago. Went down to Atlanta to run the Publix half marathon with the Kyle Pease Foundation, which is an organization like Ainsley's Angels. And I did horrible. Jacob and I say I did horrible. Jacob did great. It was really cool. he was a trooper. But it kind of, I guess, like I was like, oh man, running is giving me the opportunity to meet amazing people, like travel, and I'm not gonna be bad at running anymore. So I took off this like process of like, I want to qualify for the Boston Marathon, which required Jacob and I running a marathon in under 3 hours, because it's based off of my age. So tried a couple times. I did badly a couple times. We got a flat tire one time. And then finally this past May, we ran a 2 hour and 55-minute marathon in the Vineyard, which qualified us for this year's Boston. So yeah, in about 5 weeks, we'll be one of the 12 wheelchair duos lining up, which will be awesome, as well as Sean and Seamus from Ainsley's Angels. They'll be one of the other duos as well. So yeah, I'm
going to try to get them on this summer. They haven't been on the show yet.
Yep.
But I don't know about you, but I get very self-conscious as a trainer of like, oh no, I'm supposed to perform well. I'm a trainer. And then I'll be like, Darlene, you do it again. But it does feel like that pressure that you put on yourself, because you're like, oh, I'm supposed to be a certain way. I'm a trainer.
Yeah. And I mean, my ability to run is not what makes me effective at supporting other runners. And people will come up to me and they'll be like, yeah, I run, but not like you. I'm like, it doesn't matter. I was like, I don't care if you're running a 10-minute mile or a 6-minute mile. Like if you have a specific goal, I would love to be part of kind of helping you get there. So people are so demeaning to their abilities when they're just starting out. But that's what I think is nice about our facility, is just it lowers the barrier to entry, because people realize that our staff are not just like, when you hear that a gym's inclusive for people with disabilities, you probably make the assumption that the staff are empathetic, the staff are willing to meet you where you're at. So it introduces all these populations that aren't necessarily individuals with disabilities, but they might be people who are hesitant to get into a gym. And kind of being inclusive, being accessible, gives you this public facing perception that like, I'm welcoming, I'm willing to support you. And I think it's been a great aspect of our business, not just an altruistic one, but like a profitable and a beneficial one.
Yeah. And an incredible community that you've built. Like, I know for the listener, we've said the name Sean and Seamus a few times. It's another duo pair of father and son that Brendan and I both know, and I've had the pleasure of knowing. And Sean's been trying to get me to come run with them, and I'm really worried about pushing the chair and hurting myself because of the EDS. And just they're like, you don't even have to push, just come and be with us. And that feeling of, oh, these people really just want me around. They just want people around. They want that feeling of connection and community. And we talk about the show all the time, why that matters from a well-being perspective. But to me, it seems like such a natural extension once you see it in terms of the inclusion piece of it. How then now, if everyone's welcome, that means I'm welcome, regardless of whether or not I have a disability or not. right? And
Yeah.
all of the things that come with belonging when that's the offer. One of my favorite things I've been seeing recently is Arnold Schwarzenegger has been lifting with a bodybuilder with Downs, and very regularly is posting their collab posting. And I think it's the most fantastic thing I see on my feed right now, because I feel so differently about bodybuilding, seeing this athlete celebrate this thing he so clearly loves doing and is not going to let anyone stop him. And yeah, it's like Arnold being out there doing it. I get it.
Yeah, and
Love it.
that's part of the process of normalizing inclusion and disability. Like, if someone like that is showcasing that they're excited and willing to train with someone who might look different than them, then there's no reason why it can't just become commonplace at any facility. But yeah, Boston will be great. I think I'm very process oriented. So just the main goal was to qualify and get there. So we accomplished that. And Boston will be a completely different experience. Obviously, tons of spectators, big event. So we're just going to enjoy it. But yeah.
It's gonna be awesome. Awesome. One of 12 pairs. Where else can our listeners find you and your work?
Yeah, AdaptX is where we'll put out most of our educational material. I don't do great with the gym social media as well. So adaptx.coach. Someone has the solely AdaptX handle if they want to.
Punks, we'll get it from them.
If they want to come forward, they have 0 followers and 0 following. But if they want to give it to me, that would be sweet. But so adaptx.coach on Instagram, pretty active on LinkedIn as well. Love to connect with people on LinkedIn and learn more about the work that they're doing. And then our website, adaptx.org, has everything from the podcasts to our team, to blog posts and the educational curriculum. And yeah, that's probably the best place to find us.
Amazing. Awesome. And thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Darlene. Appreciate the invitation.
Awesome. All right, listeners, I'm going to give you a reminder of these 2 announcements. Next week's show, March 20th, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, we are going to be live on NASM's YouTube channel, and we're going to be live every week going forward, because now we're a live show. Remember to take that listener survey. You could win a $100 Amazon gift card. The link is in the show notes, as well as Brendan's name and AdaptX and all of those other words he said, so that you can find him out there on the interwebs. And of course, I would love to hear your feedback. You can email me. It's info@darlene.coach. I'm on Instagram. That is also darlene.coach. And if you're a fan of the show, I hope that you've already subscribed. But if you haven't, go ahead and do that. Thank you to everyone who's been writing us a review. That helps us game that algorithm so we can get out there. And if you do love this show, if it has positively impacted you and yours, be sure to share it, because sharing is caring, and tag us on your socials. Thanks so much. Take good care of yourselves and be well.